Trans activists are threatening to burn down a school full of children because they are not allowed to enter the girls' bathrooms. In other words, it is a day ending in Y. Though, despite the puzzling absurdity of all of this, there is of course an internal logic at play here, a reason for why they are doing this, a reason they themselves can accept, at least, which is what we're going to talk about today. But first, a brief bit of background to our mystical and magical adventure, as this has to do with that recently announced new wizarding game, Hogwarts Legacy 2. You know, one really would think that the story of a neglected, abused boy finally finding out who he really is and where he belongs would speak to a bunch of people who claim to have been born with the incorrect plumbing and really just wants to fit in, unless, of course, they just happen to be a bunch of actual predators sectioning off their hunting grounds. But oh well, details. To return to the point, I'm sure you all remember Hogwarts Legacy 1. More so for the chaos surrounding it than the game itself in all due likelihood, as it's transmogrified into quite the shitstorm slurry. Partially, of course, this was because of J.K. Rowling, famous first and foremost for running transgender death camps out of her backyard in Scotland, presumably a hobby of hers in between wearing a tiny mustache and practicing marching. Or so at least you would be forgiven for thinking if you've seen any of the coverage around her for the last 6 to 7 years. But for once, the horrible hag of Hogwarts, the single greatest existential crisis to have ever struck the left, was not fully and solely to blame, as the game also drew a lot of hissing and spitting for its lead designer, Troy Levitt, who had once upon a time ran an anti-woke YouTube channel. And I mean, boy, that is pretty gosh darn evil. A moral crime equivalent, or perhaps worse, to abducting children to irreversibly mutilate them. No, wait, no. I'm thinking of the other crowd here. Anyways, much hubbub was had, and the moral majority of anti-bigoted fans, trans activists, anti-fascists, true feminists, progressives, and flag wavers of every kind swore they would destroy this evil wizarding video game via the means of a boycott, the likes of which the magic world has never seen before. At least not since the last 7 attempts to boycott Call of Duty, anyways. The game went on to not flop horribly, and instead sell a mildly absurd 40 million copies, body slamming the entire prog sphere with the realization that they are not just a minority, but the smallest of all minorities, a loud one. This realization struck as hard and heavy as only a yo mama joke could hit if this was your birthing person. Now, one might suspect that if you had just personally been cockslapped by the deity of truth and illumination, you would avoid doing the precise same thing again. However, strategy was never their strong suit, now was it? But insanity aside, what is it that motivates this sort of behavior? It's certainly not any actual belief that this is going to work. The entire left wing's campaigning as Harry Potter has been one perpetual humiliation engine. Seriously, the people championing another boycott of this would be better off live streaming their own anal annihilation by cheese grater than this. Or, well, as the saying goes, insanity does have a logic all of its own. I suppose they could be deluded enough by their own sense of indoctrinated moral superiority to imagine just about any sort of £250,000 pink gummy bear at this point. And that is sort of, kind of, precisely what is happening. Because this reaction is not motivated by strategy. Well, once upon a time, the last time around maybe, it probably was, at least in part, as the left was still accustomed to being able to cancel things at will, people or products. This was a flexing of the progressive cancellation muscles, and it came back weak and wanting, a major victory for us in the opposition. But today, at this point in time, it is motivated by a genuinely primal reaction, an emotional one rather than a rational one. Fear. Now, sure, as I all too often say when discussing these topics, this may sound crazy. After all, how is a video game supposedly something to be feared, indeed to the point where it is killing people, and I do mean kill, as in they will use that precise verbiage when talking about J.K. Rowling. And this may be news to you, but J.K. Rowling is not actually driving around the countryside sniping trans people from the top of a double-decker bus. At least I'm reasonably sure we would have heard of it if that was the case, but there is a real and widespread fear on the left that there is a, quote, transgender genocide happening right now. As per usual, this is a linguistic trick using the word genocide with its obvious implications to stoke sympathy from the outsider and fear in those inside the group, and it has been quite effective, with many of the left genuinely believing and internalizing this message. So instead of simply going on with the mockery outright, for from mockery, albeit satisfying, we learn little, let us investigate it then. The justification for the genocide term comes from Raphael Lemkin's definition of genocide. He was a, and I quote from Wikipedia, a Polish Jewish lawyer. Yeah, I know. But anyways, he coined the term genocide, and he defined it thus, quote, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. The salient points here are, of course, causing serious bodily or mental harm, along with deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. The left argues that transgender people are experiencing an epidemic of violence, covering the bodily harm part, and that the government, via legislation, is making it impossible and painful to exist as a trans person in America. Further, that this is a deliberate attempt to destroy trans people in total, covering the mental and group conditions part. And there is certainly a lot of legislation going on targeting trans people in particular. But all of this still sounds like a bit of a stretch, especially the bathrooms and sports legislation. How is blocking a man from pissing in the woman's lavatory genocidal? Or stopping a man from beating the living daylights out of a woman in the ring somehow making it impossible for trans people to exist? And is there really legislation out there banning trans people from healthcare? Well, as mentioned previously, the proc is quite fond of linguistic tricks. This section has quite a lot of that. So let's sally forth into the marshes, shall we? Firstly, healthcare. Because this would be by far the most egregious one. If there was a governmental system designed to deny healthcare to trans people, so if one shows up with a bleeding head wound, the doctor would simply go, ew, that's a man in a dress, I'm not touching that. I mean, that would indeed be somewhat unreasonable. However, shocking though it may be, that's not quite what we're talking about here. By and large, the healthcare legislation is things like banning gender-affirming care for minors, whether it be ye old snip-snip or drugs. Other things targeted are so-called gender-affirming surgeries, like top surgery to add or remove breasts, and modifications to the lower half, like carving out a gash down there, for example, to simulate a vagina, in the same way that fucking a lawnmower whilst it's running constitutes masturbation. Or to install the, to be fair, rather awesomely sounding neo-penis. And yes, just on the off chance you are a UA citizen and wondering, do my taxes pay for the neo-penis? Then yes, yes indeed they do. And this is considered critical access to healthcare. As much as I see the appeal of the neo-penis, I am not at all convinced that this does indeed equal critical healthcare. But this is where the progressive perspective comes back in. In the prog worldview, identity is everything. You are defined by what you are. Being trans is to be the opposite gender, and equally, if not more importantly, to be accepted and seen as that gender, to be affirmed both legally through things like passports and public registration, etc., and socially by passing as a woman. Since most bearded men will have a hard time with the latter part, gender-affirming care is therefore necessary to be that gender. Remember as well that they believe a priori that men can be women, literally, biologically women. Therefore, any attempt to refute or block the idea that a man can be a woman and vice versa, like refusing them access to the facilities that they would otherwise, being a woman, be allowed to gain access to, for example, blocking access to sports or bathrooms, this is then systemic discrimination. Because in their eyes, this is just a woman seeking to gain access to the women's bathroom. There is no other differences between a trans woman and a woman than the fact that one is denied access and the other isn't. And furthermore, a woman that is a woman, despite not being a woman, must of course be given the surgery she requires to be a woman. Denying that care is like denying insulin to diabetics. Cruel and deadly. A somewhat reaching conclusion, but that is the logic. And if we accept the previous propositions, then I can see at least the cruel part. But deadly? Not paying for a woman's cock enhancement is deadly? How precisely do we make that pig fly? It is at this point that we bring up Hogwarts Legacy again, and how it is literally killing people. If denying gender-affirming care or access to bathrooms and female sports is systemic oppression, then that is the government targeting trans people for being trans. This in turn makes it harder to be trans. Furthermore, since trans people are often viewed as the source of many problems today, including being parasites on the LGBT community, this dehumanizes trans people and leads to societal ostracization. The dehumanization will then lead to an acceptance of violence against them and thus genocide. Man, I wish I knew this logic back in the day when they were calling gamers nothing but sex pests and rapists, but oh well, details, I'm not holding a grudge or anything. In other words, all of this makes it really suck to be trans, which is also, by the way, the reason for the downright remarkable Minecrafting rates. Because in a world where you sit at the very top of the progressive pyramid, well, that's just not a world worth living in, apparently. Furthermore, this is all a targeted plan, with the goal, they argue, to make being trans so impossible or dangerous that the identity of being trans disappears. And since identity is you, this erasure equals death. Or to summarize as to how this relates to Hogwarts, J.K. Rowling is a TERF, trans-exclusionary feminist. She believes that men are pretending to be women specifically to infiltrate and steal away female spaces. As a logical extension of this, she rejects the idea that trans women are women. Their very existence is in fact nothing more than a plot to hustle in on her privileges as a woman. J.K. Rowling has furthermore funded significant legal battles against trans women and people, like getting the UK courts to rule that a man in a dress is indeed actually a man. like a magic spell. Unmolesto! And boom. Transgender women have been, legally at least, wiped from existence in the merry old nation of Albion. Following the logic we laid out earlier then, this in turn means that J.K. Rowling as good as went house to house, door to door, and personally erased every single trans person in Britain. The right wing, of course, disputes all of this rather stridently, arguing that outside of a microscopic number of people who do genuinely suffer from the mental illness that is gender dysphoria, the majority of trans people today are the victims of a social contagion, a fad for attention and popularity, and the statistics appear to bear that out, with some studies like the UK Tavistock Gids referrals showing how the number of trans people per 10,000 was sub 0.1 in 2009. And then in 2021, the number had risen to 8.3. That is an over 80-folds increase and an even higher increase in referrals. Yeah, the chemicals in the water really are turning the frogs trans. Or this is a societal thing rather than a physical thing. And if it is, as the data seems to indicate, a societal contagion, then medically treating it with irreversible consequences is just about the worst possible idea we could be having right now. But I'm not really here so much to deliver the counter-arguments as I am here to explain the Hogwarts Legacy phenomenon, so let me largely gloss past that. In addition to the previous explanation on why the left believes this is genocide then, we must also add that the left believes transgenderism is not something you can fix. They do not believe there is a cure for transgenderism, only treatments. Beyond that, still, since gender dysphoria isn't something you get rid of or fight away, repressing it therefore only causes further mental stress and struggles down the line, making the person even sicker than before. Combine this with the idea of erasure we went over, the notion that denying that a person is trans is erasing, thus destroying the identity, thus killing them, and we arrive at a position where even suggesting that there is a cure rather than simply treatment, that there is a way to fix a person, to think that they are the right gender after all, well, that is obviously transphobic, and a clear case of erasure, in turn, therefore, murder. For the final point of the explanation then, notice now how a lot of these posts are either violent, like burning down the school, or rejective, very, very rejective, if you play this I'll never speak to you again, or absolute in your need, everybody's needs, to reject it. If you play the wizard game, you are denying the value of trans lives. Straight up, their lives. Not merely their inconveniences or anything, their actual lives. It seems hysterical. Absurdly so, and has, by and large, drawn mockery this time around, as the left does not have the societal power it once did. But if you believe all of the things we have gone over today, then you believe that the state, special interest groups, the entire internet, games companies, and a billionaire J.K. Rowling are all coming for you, specifically to make your life miserable and to eventually destroy you, to literally kill you and commit genocide against you and your kind. This is a very dangerous and very effective form of indoctrination. a classic cult tactic, in fact, where you intentionally seek to separate a person from others, from reality, if at all possible, and ensure the only succor and safety they can seek comes from the cult itself. In this case, the ideology of progressivism. Once this sets in, bringing somebody out of the cult and back to reason is extremely difficult, if not damn near impossible, because they have already been told and accepted, in this case, that you and everybody else out there that is not explicitly on their side and is constantly, vehemently verbal about it, all of the others seek their total annihilation. And everything that happens in the world, even something like a video game or a movie, is reframed as yet another ingredient in a genocide, targeting you in particular. That is how you get to the point where you actually believe that a video game about pretending to be a wizard is out to kill people. It requires a fair bit of mental gymnastics, and perhaps more importantly, it requires a lot of repetition of the indoctrinating ideas, and, as well, as I mentioned, the linguistic tricks. This doesn't work if you're simply telling somebody that a game doesn't represent them, or might in some way mildly inconvenience them. This only functions through fear layered upon fear upon fear, causing the target to self-isolate to protect themselves from, again, what they've been told is a literal genocide. Literally killing people. If that's the kind of headspace someone is in, you can see why they might do some really off-the-wall stuff, like freaking out over a wizard game. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.